CloudSplitter Coffee applauds those who get up and get after it, no matter the conditions. They know that kick-ass coffee and outdoor adventure are the perfect pair. CloudSplitter Coffee is ethically sourced and expertly roasted, keeping you caffeinated, satisfied, and most importantly, outside. Your coffee, just like your wildest backcountry story, should be bold and brag-worthy. Head over to cloudsplittercoffee.com and use the promo code ADK10 to receive a special discount specifically for 46 of 46 podcast listeners. And you'll also like to know that the founder of this company is a winter Adirondack 46er. CloudSplitter Coffee, for the love of the grind. We're up here on top of Mount Marcy, just waiting for the sun to rise. Day 2 of the Northville Blasted Trail is in the books. Well, life doesn't get much better than this open ridge walk on Jay Mountain, and we're at the summit of Lower Wolfjaw, our 8th high peak of the day here on the Great Range Traverse. Well, it's 4:30 a.m., heading a big slide today, and it's negative 4 degrees here at the parking lot. Bushwhacking our way up Green Mountain, and I have to say, the trees are winning this fight today. Well, the sun is shining and the wind is whipping here up on Haystack. Next stop, Saddleback Cliffs. Cock-a-doodle-doo from the summit of Rooster Comb. Scarface might be the most underrated hike in the entire park. 60-mile-an-hour winds up on Hurricane. Very fitting, cruising up the Bald Rock slab here on Bald Mountain. Standing up here on the summit of Catamount Mountain, Iroquois, Mount Van Hovenberg, Skylight, Santanoni. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. Getting into the backcountry is a bigger challenge in the winter than it is in any other season of the year. But in my opinion, it also comes with a bigger payoff. Knowing you're out experiencing places firsthand that most people wouldn't dare visit, that excites me. Putting in the work to explore the world outside of what many would call the norm, it creates a connection with nature that most people will only read about. It also shows how strong you are truly when the going gets tough, and I think that is a very good thing. Now, I understand that winter sports and activities aren't for everyone, at first glance at least, but I do believe that everyone can do them and enjoy them if they have the right gear, the right layers, and the levels of warmth that keep them comfortable. Now, I don't care how much a person hates the snow and the cold. If they were properly dressed in the right clothing and they were warm, and they were dropped onto the summit of a mountain in, let's say, the middle of January, they would be looking around like a kid in a candy store, completely awestruck by nature and what they're witnessing all around them before their very eyes. They would not be able to look away. I believe that outdoors fun does not need to be put on hold during the winter. Instead, it simply creates a new and different version of fun. Whether you're enjoying the wintry outdoors in snowshoes or on skis or in a tent, the adventure does not have to stop if you don't want it to. And I also encourage others to challenge themselves a little bit to experience the outdoors in the winter if they never have before. So continuing with my All Things Winter 101 here on the 46 of 46 podcast, I wanted to hit another subject that seems a bit odd at first, but to others it seems very intriguing as well. Winter camping. Now, if you just rolled your eyes and thought to yourself, gross, why would I ever camp in the woods in the snow? Don't be too quick to judge, because I think if you give it a chance, it would be a real adventure that you'd be talking about for a long time. You might even start to love it. However, on the other hand, if upon hearing winter camping, your eyes lit up and you turned up the volume of the podcast ever so slightly, great, you are in good company. So today I'm going to break down some basic concepts and necessary gear to give you a fighting chance for an enjoyable, a safe, and a fun winter camping adventure. First things first, though, having the right gear is literally a life or death scenario, so do not skimp. Have what you need to have, invest the money, spend it where it needs to be spent. If you're not willing to do that, just skip it. Second, do not make your first winter camping adventure somewhere deep in the mountains. In fact, I recommend trying it out in your front yard for a night or two before going into the woods. And if you don't have a yard, just, try it somewhere that allows you to get into your car if you really need to. This way you can learn a ton about your gear, what you need to improve upon, and what worked very well, and you still have the ability to, go inside or get into your car if you need to. So today I'll start with the same old yet oh so important subject of layering. Yes, it's important when you're winter hiking, you're skiing, you're hunting, you're ice fishing, or whatever outdoors activity you find yourself doing in the dead of winter. And camping is no different, and arguably more important to dial in correctly, since you're typically moving around doing those other things, generating body heat. When you're camping, not so much. As I mentioned in episode 1 of my 3-part Winter Hiking 101 series a few weeks ago here on the podcast, I like merino wool base layers. Wool provides a very nice natural warmth. However, synthetic also work just fine as well. They each have their pros and cons, as wool might dry a little slower, but it doesn't smell as bad as synthetic, but they do both work. Just avoid cotton at all costs, because cotton, once it's wet, it is useless, and once it's wet and it's still on your body, it actually makes matters worse because it will never dry. Nothing like being cold and wet. Now, a lot of people may be hiking to climb some mountains, and then, they might camp along the way. So if that is the case, I do recommend having a top and bottom base layer solely for sleeping. So you'll have your hiking layers, and then you'll have your sleeping layers. And even if you're doing other activities, it's nice to just have separate sleep layers. I want to keep those base layers that are designed for sleeping or meant for your night in the tent sacred. Unless you find yourself, in a real survival predicament, of course, then, do what you need to do. Obviously, survival comes first, but, in general, having your day layers and then your night layers is a very good workflow. When you're hiking, you'll wear base layers and maybe a synthetic shirt, on top of your base layer on top, and perhaps even a mid-layer long sleeve fleece if you don't sweat too bad. And that, in my opinion, is the best combo for warmth and breathability when you're on the move, climbing mountains or running through the woods, working up a sweat. But of course, our goal is not to sweat at all with the proper layering, right? That's the goal. Easier said than done sometimes, but we can do what we can to minimize it. Layers on, layers off, avoid sweating as much as we can. Nothing of that sorts will ever change. Whenever you're outside in the winter, layers on, layers off, try not to sweat. So as we're at our campsite preparing for a night in the elements, we have our sleeping base layers, and now also let's talk about our sleep socks. Again, I recommend having a heavy pair of socks dedicated solely for sleeping. Then that pair of socks that you'll wear during the day, you will want to keep that inside your sleeping bag up against your body all night to dry those day socks with your body heat. Trust me there, it works and it's necessary. So a separate pair of socks to sleep in and a separate pair of socks to do whatever you're doing during the day in, and then keep those socks inside your sleeping bag so that your body heat dries them each night. It's a great workflow. You'll be happy that you do that. Next, while you're at your campsite, you will want to have the same layers as when you're hiking. The mid layers, the top layer shell, and, either hard shell or soft shell jacket. And of course, the puffy jacket. So the same types of layers that you would have doing whatever recreation you're doing. These principles, they do not change. Your base layer, your mid layer, and your top layer. Base layers to keep you warm and get moisture off your skin. The mid layers are kind of the insulation layer, and the puffy jacket is included in that subject. And then your top layer shells, sometimes a hard shell, sometimes a soft shell, keeps the wind and all the elements off of you and off of your clothes. So that doesn't really change. Those principles are principles for a reason. Now, when it comes to top layers at the campsite and in your packs, a good rule of thumb is that hard shell top layers protect better in wet conditions and high wind, but they do lack breathability. So you'll sweat a lot. So if you're doing a lot of movement, not such a great idea. Whereas those soft shell jackets, they do work better in dry conditions, but when you're out moving or hiking, they breathe so much better. So, it kind of depends on what you're doing. If you're camping in the middle of a backpacking trip or the middle of an ice fishing trip, you'll probably typically need different types of jackets depending on what you're out there doing. You don't really break as much of a sweat ice fishing as you do climbing a mountain. Unless you don't have an electric auger, in which case, you're going to break a sweat. That's for sure. Just a good rule of thumb. But there's just nothing like finishing a long day in the woods and then changing out of those clothes. And yes, it will be a little cold for a minute, but you're tough. You can handle it. You're out here in the winter. It's snowing. You're out there. Then you put on your sleep clothes and that puffy jacket, and it's you don't even remember that you're out in the woods now. You feel like you're home in your living room. Now, when it comes to those puffy jackets, these should keep you the warmest. Now, I've slept in my puffy many times while winter camping inside of my sleeping bag, and then I've had other nights in other places where I didn't sleep in it and I had other layers on. And then once I'd wake up in the morning, I'd put the jacket on once I got out of my sleeping bag. So, it all depends on situations, scenarios, temperatures, all that sorts of thing. But you gotta have it. So remember, those puffy jackets, they don't work well when they're wet, though. You'll want to avoid getting them wet. There's down jackets. There's, that's the puffy jacket. There's down insulation. There's synthetic, and they all work. They all have their pros and cons. Pack down inside your backpacks very nicely, and they do provide excellent warmth when you're at your campsite or not moving, whether you're just kind of hanging out for the day or hanging out for, a half hour. Pop that puffy jacket on. You'll be glad you did. Synthetic coats tend to dry faster, so if you're on a multi-day backpacking trip and you may be in serious or wet elements, it could be a good choice for that reason. You just want to keep it dry and, keep it sacred. And don't forget, you can get wet from the inside too with these jackets. If you're creating a lot of moisture and you're sweating, so those jackets, they can get wet from the outside, rain and snow, but they can also get wet from the inside. And, that's the moisture you want to avoid. So if you're doing something that could involve sweating, I would highly recommend take off that puffy jacket. Again, think of it as like the blanket at home. You don't want to lay on the couch with a wet blanket on you. Same type of principle. And as always, when it comes to winter outdoors fun, you want to avoid sweating. I've said it already today. I made a big point of it in the winter hiking series because sweating leads to wet clothes, which can quickly lead to hypothermia, which can quickly kill you if not treated immediately. Oh yeah, this is also a good time to remind all of you listening that the mountains don't care about you. They don't care about your emotions. They don't care about what you got going on. You have to be prepared. So this is serious business, and I want you all to come back home alive and well from your outdoors adventure. And going along with the puffy jacket, this is also a good time to mention that I feel multiple pairs of gloves are crucial, and having a pair that is extra warm is even better. So when you're at your camp and you're not really moving around a lot, it's hard to do anything when your hands are freezing. It's also, it makes me legitimately angry when my hands are cold. So in the same manner as, the puffy keeps your body warm at camp, having some really good camp gloves will do the same for your hands. And when your hands can function, even if you have to take them out of the gloves to do some stuff, you'll be in a much better spot. Now, moving on, I'm going to talk about your bed, aka sleeping bags and pads. We'll start with sleeping bags. Now, many people have an opinion on what's better regarding down or synthetic sleeping bags, and I'll just tell you about the choices and then you can kind of go from there. So you have down insulation, which is lighter and it arguably lasts longer and it compresses down even smaller, but it is more expensive. Those ultralight backpackers tend to like that sort of thing. Whereas synthetic bags, they do dry faster and they work a little bit better when they're wet, and they're less expensive. They cost less. So, do what you can do. Typically, when camping in any season, winter included, you will always deal with moisture due to the elements and due to condensation inside your tent. So whichever bag you do opt for, it is your duty to keep it as dry as possible while using and while traveling. A lot of people utilize waterproof stuff sacks for this exact reason. Put your sleeping bag inside of a waterproof stuff sack so it is not wet. The last thing you want at the end of a long day in the woods when you're trying to get in your sleeping bag at night in the cold and the wet winter is to realize, crap, your sleeping bag is also wet. That spells both misery and potential serious disaster in the middle of the night. So sleeping bags should also be kept sacred along with your base layers and your socks. Now, sleeping bags are also not one size fits all. They're rated for various temperatures. And I'm sure that goes without saying. I'm sure you all probably know it, but I'll say that anyways. As another general rule of thumb, you do want a sleeping bag rated for at least the coldest temperature you expect to experience. There are sleeping bag liners that you can also buy that boost the warmth of the bag by, a good 15 degrees. I see a lot of people with silk ones, so that's an option too. However, that is another item to carry, so keep that in mind. But depending on what you already have, there is that option to get you some more warmth inside that sleeping bag and get a few more degrees out of what you currently have. They do make 0-degree sleeping bags. So actually, before I move on from sleeping bags, I want to also talk about how to sleep in your sleeping bag. Your instinct in the winter may be to put the bag over your whole face, for warmth, but you got to resist this urge. So because by doing so, you'll increase the condensation inside your bag because you'll be breathing, and then that air will be inside your sleeping bag and then mixed with the cold air outside. You are going to make your sleeping bag wet. And wet sleeping bags in the winter is a bad thing. So instead, wear like a balaclava to sleep over your face to keep the air off your face, or, maybe put a hat over your face, that sort of thing. But again, you just need to keep that sleeping bag dry, and you want to avoid putting it over your head because it will make that bag wet. Moving on to sleeping pads. Now, these are so important. Getting your body off the cold ground is crucial to staying warm, and it's your best resistance to heat loss throughout the night. Now, if you find yourself trapped in the woods for an unexpected overnight, kind of use the same principle. Maybe like gather a ton of spruce and pine limbs to try building a bed to help you get off the cold ground and help provide some insulation from your body against that cold ground. But anyway, sleeping pads are typically inflatable or foam. Those are typically your options. And they all have different R values. Now, the R value refers to a pad's thermal resistance, and it allows you to compare it to other pads that you might purchase. So for winter camping, you typically want at least a 3.5 R value. And depending how far you're going to camp and, weight considerations in your backpack, how much stuff you want to hold, you may even bring multiple pads. And then, as simple math goes, you increase the R values that you have because you do indeed add the two together. So if you have a foam pad and you have an inflatable pad, take both R values and add them together, and that's what you'll have underneath you as you sleep. And in my experience, multiple pads makes a world of difference. Being as far away from the cold ground as possible is the goal. That helps. And obviously, it's worth, in my opinion, it's worth carrying more stuff for a better night's sleep. A better night's sleep sets you up for a better day, and a better day sets you up for a better trip. So keep that in mind. All right. Moving on, let's talk tents. Now, first off, if you're in the Adirondacks, there's an abundance of lean-tos just pretty much everywhere. And that is always my personal go-to, even in the winter, simply out of ease and the convenience of not carrying or having to set up a tent. But, that, of course, comes with its own cons, such as waking up in the middle of the night covered in snow. It's the worst. It sucks. But, if you're bringing a tent, you'll obviously avoid that, but then you'll be bringing the tent. But lean-tos are also an option. But of course, they come with the obvious cons that are, pretty self-explanatory. It's not a closed-off structure like a tent is. So let's talk tents. You will want a 4-season tent. These can be completely sealed off from snow and wind, and they allow you to stay dry inside these tents. They are also capable of having some heavy snow on top of them without buckling and folding, and they can handle heavy winds. So they're better suited for the winter. It's better to have the tent that can handle whatever nature throws at it. Now, remember how earlier I said the mountains don't care about you? You never really know when a storm is going to roll in, whether you expected the night to be clear or not. The mountains do not care about what your plans were or what you read on the internet in terms of what the weather was going to be like. So keep that in mind. It's best to always be prepared for everything, especially in the winter. All right, so make sure your tent is fastened down with all the guy lines as well. That should go without saying. But, of course, those winds, the heavy snow, all sorts of things, you don't want your tent to become a sail in any season, but especially in the winter. Now, the different types of tents we have are, you have double wall tents and single wall tents. Double wall tents are warmer, less condensation buildup. They're better for longer stints out there, but of course, they're much heavier and bulkier. Now, single wall tents, they tend to tickle the fancy of those Graham Weenie backpacker types. You all know who you are. Every ounce counts, right? So those are some options. It's also important to note that regardless of which tent you use, make sure you always crack that front zipper open and open the vents on the side of the tent. You need to allow the moist air to escape that, builds up inside the tent from your breathing. No one wants to wake up in the wet in the morning or in the middle of the night. That's how condensation happens inside your tent. So make sure you crack that, let some air flow. Should go without saying, but in case you don't know, that's what you need to do. Another fan favorite for winter hiking that I do see amongst a lot of Adirondack hikers are the hammock tents. They are a valid option. They also get you very far off the ground. They tend to be, kind of lower profile inside your backpack too. You can also still put sleeping bags inside them for some insulation underneath you. So that's a plus. They're great options if you don't mind, I feel personally that you kind of sleep somewhat awkwardly in a hammock tent, but other people disagree. Kind of different strokes for different folks, but that is another option for your tent in the wintertime. So check that out. And now we all know what it's like to have to get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night when you're at home. So when you're at home, it's annoying, right? And then when you're in a sleeping bag in a tent, it's even more annoying. But when you're in a sleeping bag in a tent in the cold winter, it is downright awful. But remember, you can't hold it. You gotta get up. So get up, get out of the sleeping bag, toss on that puffy, get out of your tent. I know it's annoying. Oh, it's so cold. The air is so freezing. I just want to get back in my sleeping bag. But you got to go take care of your business, because actually it costs your body a lot of energy by holding it in. And, keeping it warm inside your body. You are better off getting rid of it so your body can be doing other productive things. I was told that by a hiking friend of mine back when I was in high school. He's a doctor, does a lot, 46er, the whole typical thing, does a lot of camping. But I remember him telling us, always get up to go pee, even when you're camping, because it causes your body to do more work to hold it in. And when you're out camping, you're out in the woods, you're in the elements, you need your body to be able to do the things it needs to actually do. I know it sucks. No one wants to get out of the tent in the summer, let alone in the winter, to go pee, but you got to do what you got to do. All right, so now I've covered layers to sleep in, the sleeping bag and the sleeping pads and the tent. And now I want to go over another item that could be easily forgotten, but I thought I should include it in this episode, and that is the camp stove. Yes, it's kind of the item a lot of people probably wouldn't have thought about, but they're enjoyable to have in the summertime, but they are a must in the winter. Liquid fuel or white gas stoves tend to work better than butane canister stoves in the winter, because the butane stoves, they don't perform quite as well in the cold. They're sometimes iffy, whereas the white gas stoves work the same, whether it's 0 degrees or it's 80 degrees. It's good to have reliable gear when you're out there in the cold, So, stuff that actually works, it's good to set yourself up for that type of success. So the white gas stoves. And since you'll be melting snow sometimes to make your water, and then you'll also be cooking your food with it, it really is just crucial to be able to rely on the gear and rely on your stove, because it becomes kind of a cornerstone to your equipment out there. Because if you don't have water, you can't cook your food. Something tells me you're going to be going home. Could be the difference between a great adventure and one that ends very early. There's also something to be aware of, too, is having a stand for your stove. It's a little easier to figure out a place to, put the stove to heat it up to cook in the summertime, whereas in the snow, it's like that's obviously you don't have anywhere to set it. So having a stand for your stove is something to also take into account. A lot of them kind of have them built in, not all of them, but something to be aware of before you get out there. That is an easy thing to overlook when you're planning for your camping trip, is to where do I put the stove on to cook? So something to be aware of. Now, speaking of food and water, having more food and more water than you expect or that you're used to having is also very important in the winter, since your body is also working way harder to keep it functioning, thus burning more calories than you expect. So have more food than usual, not the same and definitely not less. And then eating also helps your body keep working and therefore keep warm. A lot of times in the middle of the night, if you're cold, a lot of people recommend just getting up and eating something that was going to help your body start churning a little bit, and it'll actually naturally start to warm up. Not a ton, but just a bit. Winter camping, or really any activity in the mountains in general, it's just not the time to be on a diet to lose weight. Save that for when you're at home. When you're out there, have more food than you need, always. And another tip that I wanted to share that was imparted on me from a buddy who has been winter camping in the 80K backcountry for decades is to boil water with your stove right before bed. Put it in a bottle, like a thermos or a bottle that's not going to open, and then hold that warm water bottle inside your sleeping bag between your legs while you sleep. This will quickly increase your body's temperature, and that is a good thing. Do everything you can to be successful and to stay warm. If your sleeping bag has room, you can even consider putting your entire winter boots in there to keep them from freezing. I've had that happen, and it sucks. Waking up in the morning, your boots are just rock solid. It sucks. But sometimes there's not enough room in the sleeping bag. So if that's the case, it is easier said than done. But the minimum, toss your boot liners in your sleeping bag as well so that they're dry and not frozen in the morning. Kind of the same way that I talked about bringing your socks and really any of your wet clothes that you have during the day. It's not a bad practice, and it might sometimes be your only choice to get things warm, is to put those things in your sleeping bag with you. And when I say wet, I mean, I'm not talking soaking wet, but things that you need to dry, that's your best choice, your best effort to get them dry, is having them inside your sleeping bag with you. Let your body heat do what it can do. Now, my good friend and 46 of 46 podcast favorite, Mr. Jonathan Zaharik, he is always out very deep in the backcountry camping in all seasons as he waits to get those ridiculous sunrise photos that we all love. I asked him to share with us his 5 best winter camping tips. So here are Jonathan Zaharik's 5 tips for winter camping to close us out.
Tip number 1, invest into the right gear. The saying, you get what you pay for, is exactly right with winter gear. This is a life and death decision. Always choose down over synthetic if you can. There are some incredible synthetic materials out there, but down is generally going to be the best thing. It is worth spending the extra $100 on a coat. That is going to, for sure, keep you warm and dry when you need to. Oh, and obviously, no cotton. Number 2, always have a way to boil water, whether it's an emergency or if you want to cook a nice hot meal or you want to thaw out your water. It is important to be able to keep your body warm, not just with the clothing that you wear, but also what you put on the inside. This is a very important thing when it comes to mental health and the cognitive ability to make correct decisions. Tip number 3, always have a beacon with you. And if it takes batteries, make sure you always have those extra batteries and that it's fully charged and that someone knows where you are at all times. Tell people where you're going. Number 4, don't forget the toilet paper. Seriously, this is one thing in the wintertime you do not want to find yourself without. Tip number 5, always pack a Summit parka or Summit mitts, both preferably, because when you're just standing around by your campsite or even inside of your tent, you're going to be cold. Your sleeping bag, you're not going to be inside of your sleeping bag, and sometimes it's below 0, and if you're going to be standing still for hours, you need to be able to stay warm without moving. And lastly, a bonus tip. For your headlamp, which I would assume you are carrying considering you're doing it overnight, is make sure you are using lithium-ion batteries and not alkaline. And of course, carry extra ones. You need to be able to see what you're doing, and you need to have a reliable light source.
That is a great tip. Alkaline batteries in the cold die so quickly. Lithiums stand to do a much better job in that category. All right, well, I'm going to wrap things up right there. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to the world of winter camping and what you need to do it, and to enjoy the mornings in the mountains, to enjoy the nights in the mountains, to survive the nights in the mountains. It's a very unique outdoors adventure, and it's one that you can practice from home, literally before heading into the backcountry for adventure. Not a lot of outdoors activities can you really practice from home, but this you can. Don't sleep on the opportunity for expanding your horizons and trying new things in the outdoors, pun intended, even ones you never thought you would expect to try. You may just surprise yourself and find a whole new hobby, which opens up a whole new world. But anyways, thanks for listening to this Winter Camping 101 episode here on the 46 of 46 podcast. If you haven't checked them out, my Winter Hiking 101 series that came out a few weeks ago, that's a great place to start if you also want to just try some winter activities. If you like the show, please help me out by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Hit me up on social media at 46 of 46 podcast, and keep checking back on Fridays for new mountains, new stories, new guests, and new episodes right here on the 46 of 46 podcast. Head over to 46of46.com for more info on the show. You could pick up my ebook, or you could support with a hoodie or a t-shirt, and share your show with any outdoors loving friends that you may have. I really appreciate it. Anyways, thanks for deeming my show worthy of your time this week. I appreciate it greatly, and I will never take it for granted, and I'll see you next time. Remember to always leave no trace, do the rock walk, and if you carry it in, carry it out. See you on the trails.